You're listening to the Seattle Neighborhood Crier.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us again for one of our casts, pod and video casts about what's going on in Seattle around emergency preparedness, block watch and public safety, and community engagement and involvement. In today's show, we're going to do a special show where we are going to really focus on what you can do with some of the skills that you pick up through the City of Seattle's Emergency Preparedness CERT program. We had a program earlier where we had some folks in who work on that program, and they talked about what skills you learn. CERT stands for Citizen Emergency Response Team, so CERT, and they're the folks who the city is training to be the first citizen responders out in the community should there be a disaster. And so we got a really good description of what the program is and the training that they offer. And what they do after that program is they send those volunteers out into the community and say, go do good things. And so what we've got today is we've got David Wilma, who goes by Dave. He's going to be our guest today and talk about how he came to being interested in CERT and then what he's gone out in his neighborhood and done. So I'd like to introduce Dave Wilma, and we'll let him kind of start with who he is and where he comes from and how did he get involved into the CERT program. So Dave, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Cindy. Happy Friday to you. As Cindy said, I'm Dave Wilma. I live in the Licton Springs neighborhood in North Seattle, not far from North Seattle College. And my own personal background is my first career was in law enforcement. So I was definitely came up in a professional mindset where you're always thinking ahead and always being prepared to do something unexpected. So you try to expect the unexpected. In 1989, I lived in San Francisco when the Loma Prieta earthquake occurred. I was in Hawaii at the time, but I was on the phone with my wife when the earthquake hit, and then got in touch with my son, who was in the 8th grade and at home, and determined that everybody was safe. And at that time, my wife was involved in television, so she basically went to the mattresses for the next 48 hours doing earthquake coverage. But after that, we got involved in San Francisco's NERT program. That was the Neighborhood Emergency Response Team. And we formed, probably 10 or 12 people in our neighborhood, and we were trained by the fire department. It was training very, very similar to what the city does in the CERT training now. It was a little bit more top-down organized in San Francisco, and again, this goes back 20 years, but they were generally organized around the fire stations, and each fire station had an amateur radio operator assigned, or 2 or 3 or whatever. And the fire stations are what we call hubs in Seattle. We can talk about hubs later. But the training was very familiar. Basic first aid, light rescue, some neighborhood organization, what to expect. I moved back to Seattle in 1998 and wanted to get connected again. One of the first things we did when we moved to Seattle is we retrofitted our home on Queen Anne Hill. We did that even before we had the boxes unpacked, and that involved securing the sill plates to the foundation. The house dated back to the 1940s and wasn't constructed like that. Of course, our home in San Francisco had been built to code, and it was secured to the foundation. So that was one of the first things we did, and we, unpacked our earthquake kit, which had food and water, and our hard hats, and I still have my hard hat, my orange vest, little things like a set of shears that you would use to cut away clothing, not so much to expose a wound, but to provide bandaging material to some victim. And my wife and I had the basic training. So in following up on CERT training here in Seattle, I found that it wasn't organized in quite the same way, that the city and other agencies had organized CERT to just kind of insert into the community trained volunteers, and then allow the volunteers to form their organizations from the bottom up. And so I've been involved since then, the last 3 or 4 years. About 3 years ago, with a friend who was already involved, who actually told me about the CERT training, started getting involved in some of the hub trainings. Now, the hubs are neighborhood, actually more like almost like I'll almost call them regional, but neighborhood assembly points where volunteers can gather and provide mutual support until city and state and federal services can catch up. I invested in some the inexpensive GMRS radios to communicate among people, and we did a hub training a couple of years ago. And then this past year, I've gotten involved in amateur radio and gotten an amateur radio license and gotten connected with the Seattle Auxiliary Communications Service, which is kind of the next level of organization above the hubs. It provides communication between hubs and between the various neighborhood hubs and downtown. So getting back to my CERT training in my own neighborhood, I live in a kind of a small condominium development of 16 separate units, and we have meetings every other month, and part of our agenda every month is just a little couple of bullet points on preparedness, whether it's communications, water, food, make sure you have medications, how to set up contacts out of area, and we do that just within the area. And I think that the key to being a CERT is not to try and take responsibility for the entirety of the Greenwood neighborhood or the entirety of Lake City. Is you look at it, your home, your block, and maybe a couple of blocks in any direction, so that you can be of some assistance and maybe be the focal point of offering help in the event of a disaster. Now, everybody talks about the big one, the big earthquake, and that's just one event that can take place. We've already seen, and we see this every once in a while, these really terrific windstorms that come through the area, and these are historic fact. I write history books and history articles, and I'm here to tell you that those storms come through almost annually, so you can expect that it's going to happen again, just like tornadoes hit the Midwest and snowstorms. So, you know, think in terms of widespread power outages and trees blocking streets. What would a CERT do in that respect? Particularly if a tree came down on somebody's house or next to somebody's house. So it's just really important to have this technology out in the neighborhoods, out on the block, and just to be able to think in terms of how you would help as many people as you can.
Okay, so I'm going to follow up on a couple of things you said. One is, it sounds like your condo association has a standing meeting, right?
Yes.
Okay, so what you just did was you took advantage of something that's already happening in your neighborhood is a group of condo buildings, and so you just took advantage of it and you brought in little tidbits for them. So when you did that, did you have a plan of how you brought stuff in? Was there a logical order, or was it just you knew you had a couple of minutes to talk about preparedness and you just stepped them through it gradually? Did you have a thoughtful way you approached it, or was it serendipity?
I just take advantage to deliver some information each time, and I know that those individuals who are interested in more information can contact me. For example, I got the handouts from the Department of Emergency Planning and hand those out at the meetings, go around and put them in mailboxes. I'm also kind of aware of the neighborhood, look around the neighborhood and find out what one of the things I keep track of is just what are the hazards in the neighborhood. My particular neighborhood is near an area of a lot of fill, so that fill would be of great risk in the event of an earthquake, because that's where the damage is the greatest, is on landfill areas.
Mm-hmm. Does your association, do they do annual events where you could also set up a table and demonstrate something like, you know, what's in a kit, or are you just spreading it out mostly among the monthly meetings?
I do it just month to month, and I also keep everybody has an email now, so I also, you know, every time something comes up, a training announcement, any kind of interesting development. For example, the other night we had warnings of a big windstorm, so I took the National Weather Service and the city information warning of the windstorm, and I made sure everybody got an email. Well, as it turned out, several of the families were out of town, and they wanted to keep in touch. Okay, how's my house? How's the roof and everything like that? And other people who may not have maybe caught the news, something like that, they at least have the opportunity to get the heads up that there's a windstorm coming.
Yeah. A lot of what you do is very similar to the city's SNAP program, Seattle's Neighborhoods Actively Prepare, except you've got the additional expertise where if something was to happen, you would be able to respond. Did you actually, after the 2 big windstorms we've had recently here, did you guys actually find something that you could go use your skills on, like getting the branches cut up and moved? And
no, but interestingly enough is that on the street on one side of our development, a power pole failed, and they had to block off the street, and the next day City Light had to come up and sister up a new pole and do that, but the pole was hanging out over the street. I mean, that was the pole is on our property, but it just hung out over the street. So there was a real reinforcement that it can happen here.
Yeah, okay. That's very interesting. if Jet could go to show us the website, because I want to take the opportunity to show people the City of Seattle does. I mentioned the SNAP program, and that's generally what they refer. But what you've got is seattle.com/emergency, and that takes you to the emergency management page. And they've got a newsletter that you can sign up to, and it will tell you about SNAP, which is kind of the smaller block by block level, but also if you sign up on their distribution list, that is where they advertise their CERT classes. They don't actually have a CERT web page because they are very grassroots, send graduates out and let them work out in the community. But that's if you have other people who want to sign up for CERT, or if you're looking to sign up for CERT, this is really the only place that you'll find out about it first, because those classes fill up super fast. I know in Seattle, a lot of our neighborhood district coordinators pick up that information and they will send it out into their local newsletters. But by the time that newsletter hits, it's a week or 2 into the cycle, and most of the seats are gone by then. It's a really hot commodity. And the other thing you'll see on there, Jet was showing, they also have the calendar. So if you're just kind of going, when is it, just so you can keep track of the cycles, they offer one in the fall and one in the spring, and that's timed because they don't want to offer it during the winter, because that's when Office of Emergency Management staff is actually really busy, and summer just generally doesn't get very, very great attendance. So it's fall and spring. But you can also see all the other classes that they've got offered there. They've got the home retrofitting class coming up. They've got a couple of classes for storing your drinking water, and I think that's all that's scheduled so far for 2014, and then the 2015 schedule hasn't come out yet. So let's go back to Dave then and talk a little bit more about, so you're a CERT graduate, you've come out, you've really taken some leadership in your condo association level. You've also then gone on and said, hey, I have skills and ability and an interest that I want to do more and broader. You talked a little bit about the hubs already, and you did a really good summary of that. That was very nice. Then the other group you mentioned that you're involved with is called the Auxiliary Communication Service, the ACS team. And you want to talk about them a little bit too, and what you learned in CERT that you're bringing to that, or your interest in ham radio, or?
Sure. The Auxiliary Communication Service, ACS, is actually an element of the Department of Emergency Management, which comes in under the police department. And this is the next level up. This is the connection between the neighborhoods and downtown, assuming that normal communications fail. One of the things that I think was discovered in the Nisqually earthquake, when was that, 1999, was the general, not so much the failure, but the unavailability of landline and cell phone services immediately after an earthquake. One thing that happens in an earthquake is almost everybody goes and picks up their phone. Well, when everybody picks up their phone, that has the effect of basically dumping the phone system for a while until it has a time to reset itself. The same thing with cell phone service. we've discovered during things like the Seafair Parade or the Seahawks Parade and very, very big special events that everybody's on their phone, they're talking to each other, they're texting each other, they're taking pictures and uploading them, and cell phone service can be very unreliable. So the Auxiliary Communication Service hopes to overcome that and have used amateur radio frequencies, just handy talkies and radio stations to communicate between the neighborhoods and downtown. And we participate in the annual drills. I think we do it even once or twice a year, where the hubs set up and CERTs gather at the hubs, and we practice collecting and retransmitting information to the Emergency Operations Center downtown.
Yeah, we also we're planning on a spring drill for the hubs and the ACS and collecting the CERT people in. And one of the things we hope to incorporate is damage assessments. You know, being able to go out into the neighborhoods if the city is looking for additional information about what's hurt. And that's a great resource for CERTs while we are collecting information, because they've been trained to see what damage really is. You know, whether or not something might be at risk versus, you know, it's going to stand for a while, and bring that back so the city can prepare its response. I want to go back and ask also, in your own condo neighborhood, have you talked to them about practicing maybe during a drill? We have a couple of months that, you know, October is earthquake shake and drop and drill day. April is another disaster preparedness month on earthquakes. Have you talked to your group about, you know, during a drill, let's actually, you know, walk out and see if everybody can really find their go kit after a year? Have you talked about that? What do you think they would do with that idea?
I haven't done that yet. One reason being is that when these drills come up, I am generally involved at the hubs and with the ACS. My particular plan of action is that if in the event of some event that requires some kind of a citywide response or even a neighborhood response, is the first step is you got to see to yourself, see to your own family and your own home, and then you check your own neighborhood for, I will check my own neighborhood for safety issues, make sure everybody's okay. I'm a retired law enforcement officer. I have a neighbor who's another retired police officer, and you know, we'll knock on doors and make sure that everybody's okay, that a bookcase didn't fall over on them or something like that, and try to verify that everyone's all right. And then once that's established, then I'll probably take a walk around the neighborhood just to see if I can, is there anything that's within a block or two that's urgent. Assuming that works out, I'll then take my radio up to the hub, and I'm connected with several different hubs to try and be help at the next level. So the volunteers, the neighborhood volunteers, start, you know, up close, and then extends themselves as needed. And it may be that a volunteer would never leave the neighborhood because the work that they need is there. And it may be as simple as just reassurance, getting people connected with each other, letting them know, you know, the phones will come back, the cell phones will come back, and that may be all that's necessary. But if an event was to go on for hours and days, then it's going to be necessary for people to form their own organizations and be as self-supportive as possible, because the city just doesn't have the resources to take care of everybody all over the city.
Yeah, and you actually had a good point when you talked about that your email list was really effective, because if you're out of town, and a lot of folks these days travel or they're out in the summer and vacation, and something happens back home, if and when they can get through, it's really important to them to know that somebody is organized within their block or their little community and can go check, because maybe the dog sitter lives in Edmonds and can't get down to babysit the dog. And I've heard stories like that too, where, you know, we thought it was going to be okay, but we didn't realize, and it was a snowstorm, that the dog sitter couldn't get to the dog. So we were able to call the neighbors, because we look out for each other, and you know, have a healthy dog by the time they got home. You also touched on a really, really important point that I want to re-emphasize for everybody who's listening. You always make sure that you're okay, that your family's okay, and then if everything is good on that front, then keep expanding out to where you can offer help, and people forget what kind of skills they have that really do make a difference. Just being able to comfort someone is key. You know, being able to look after the pets is key. Making sure the kids are, you know, occupied and playing together and not getting stressed out. You know, those are all really, really important things, along with all the utility restoration that goes on. So that was a really, really good point.
Yeah, Cindy, I think what's really important for people to remember is that let's assume, you know, it hits the news, you know, 2 minutes ago an earthquake hit Seattle. Well, the first thing that a lot of people are going to do once they know they're okay and everything is fine is that they're going to want to reach out to friends and relatives are going to reach out to them. Well, that's going to overload the communication system. So it's really important that residents understand what's going to be available communications-wise and what's not going to be available communications-wise.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that the internet was designed to survive a nuclear war. That's why they set it up, so that we could survive a nuclear war. But if you don't have electricity to your router and your modem and your computer, the internet will be fine. It'll survive the nuclear war, but you can't get to it. So it's really important to understand what is available and what is going to be effective in terms of communication. I remember that when we were in San Francisco, it was very difficult for a while to make phone calls across town, but you could make a long-distance call. Now, technology may have changed. That was 20 years ago, 25 years ago now. Technology may have changed, but it's really important to understand that. And part of SNAP training, and then because there's the SNAP training, which is kind of the basic, you know, 2-hour go to the library kind of thing. CERT training, which is what, eight successive nights, I think it was, isn't it, Cindy? Something like that.
Well, they've condensed it down. It's 3 weekend days now. They
okay.
made it a little easier for people now.
That makes sense. 3 weekend days, so that's 24 hours of training, and so that's kind of the next level up. And then there are, of course, additional levels, particularly in the area of the hub organization, which, you know, is really a good thing for anyone who has that skill of being able to work in groups, so that you can say, okay, you know, for example, a church, even a church parking lot could be available for a gathering place for neighbors, you know, that they come in from a couple of blocks around and they say everything is fine, but I was, you know, I know first aid from the service or from the scouts, and does anybody need help? And somebody would come in and say, you know, there are all kinds of possibilities. And those are some of the things that we trained for in the hub training. So that there's really, people should understand there are a couple of ways. There's the individual SNAP training. There is then the CERT training, and then there's the whole hub organization. Even ahead of the SNAP training is just the studying that people can do with the online resources that the city provides. They've got a lot of good brochures, you know, setting up a kit. You know, if we didn't, if there was no electricity for several days, how would you cook? What would you eat? Yep. Now, a lot of people have a couple of days worth of food in the house. It may not be very interesting, but you know, people have got pasta and canned beans and things like that. So that's what the SNAP training is really good for. This is what you might just want to have in the closet in case you had to hunker down behind 3 feet of snow for 3 days. That's the kind of thing you want to think about.
Yeah, what everybody discovers is that if you're 3 days into it, you got a lot of food that's getting ready to go bad. And so that's where all of a sudden the guy down the street who has the big turkey fryer, you know, that is the value of collecting in small groups to be able to share resources. You know, you don't have to do it at a big hub. Do it at your block so that you can get that stuff cooked up and make it last longer.
Exactly. You know, okay, you know, the power's been out for 2 days, the freezer is gone, everybody bring their stuff down to the turkey fryer or the grill, and we'll just cook it all up, and it'll last, you know, for a week, like that. And it's the snowstorm is probably more instructive because that was when the city shut down for 3 or 4 days. I remember having to use my 4x4 truck to get my sister-in-law back and forth because she had a business, you know, she needed to run, and there was just no way she was going to get off Queen Anne Hill over to Magnolia otherwise. you know, the story goes, I think we were talking, Cindy was during the snowstorm, they had to send city cars out to pick up janitors to clean up the operating rooms at the hospital. I mean, who would have thought that the janitor was going to be a critical, you know, a critical piece of the infrastructure, but, you know, they couldn't use the operating room until they got it clean. So
Yep.
stuff like that you got to think about.
Yep. Yeah, good points. One of the future shows that we want to do is on social media, because you were talking about, you know, what can we do, and what the current thinking is. If you can get a text out, send a text, because the data burst is a lot less of a drain on the data resources than an actual voice phone call. And then I have not dug into it. I was starting to poke around at it today, but Facebook just posted their I'm Safe app. You know, so if you're, I haven't quite figured it out, so there'll be a better show on this later, but if you live in earthquake country, you know, and you've registered, I live at this zip code, I think is what they're going to go by, and they hear about, they detect an earthquake, then it sends you, Facebook sends you a message that says, just punch I'm okay or I'm not in the area, right? And so that your friends then start getting the messages back that say, you don't even have to try and wait for Cindy to reach you. It's already been posted that she's okay.
Well, and of course, what I would do is, if I was at some kind of a neighborhood thing, is I'd find 3 teenagers with smartphones and get them to start tweeting what's going on, and that's their job. I mean, they may not be big enough to pick somebody up, but by God, they can tweet like crazy, and they can provide a lot of really useful information for people in the neighborhood. You know, hashtag Lithan Springs or hashtag Greenwood, and they've got it all figured out. So it's not necessary to provide much in the way of training. They just need to have the information. You know, put on the thing that the Greenwood hub is operational at this location.
Yeah, I think that's a great addition for our next drill. I'll have to remember that.
Yeah,
so
you know, just find some teenagers, just you know, draft them. You with the phone, come over here, and then you know, and they've got something to do. And the reason I say this is I first got involved in this as a teenager. I was a cadet in the Civil Air Patrol in California, and we did emergency response kinds of things, and I learned how to talk on a radio, and you can just take that teenage energy and their knowledge of technology, and you can really use it. In fact, and then you could use them as almost a messaging service. Somebody could come over and says, you know, my phone is under the house, you know, can you text my relatives? And so you know, don't dismiss the teens as a resource for community involvement.
Yeah, in fact, the Queen Anne Hub is still, one of the Queen Anne Hubs is still run by the Scouts. They run all the radio operations. And so they're really a marvel to see. And then I had a drill, and in Morgan Junction, I pulled in the local Scouts, and they took messages. I mean, they actually learned how to take, you know, messages down. They ran the radios under adult supervision because they didn't all have their licenses. Mm-hmm. But we also had them standing out on the sidewalk with crank radios, and we were stopping people saying, can we see if we can charge your cell radio or your cell phone? Because this was back when there, you know, you needed, it was not so much the mini USB common adapter, and we were trying to make sure we had all the right kinds of adapters so that when people's cell phones had died by the end of the first day, that we had the ability to recharge as many as we could. And those Scouts, man, those arms were working, I'll tell you. So.
Well, if that was going to be something that the hub was going to do, is I would have those chargers inside the hub, which would be an opportunity to bring people in. I mean, they've got to come in anyway to maybe get a charge off their phones, but it's also saying, well, while your phone is charging, maybe you can help us with this particular task. If you remember, during a Superstorm Sandy, Manhattan was inundated. Lower Manhattan was inundated with water. The storm surge came in and flooded the subways, but it also flooded the utility vaults, and everybody lost their power. And anybody with a car with some kind of a charger became the most popular person in the neighborhood, so people could charge their phones back up. The downside of that is that I think it was Verizon lost 2 of their switching centers in the process too, and it was weeks and weeks before Verizon had their service back up, and they've got, you know, one of the best networks going. So there are lots of things to do. The one thing, I'll make one point too, and this comes down from Snohomish County after the 530 slide there at Oso, And the first thing you have to remember is that when something happens, it'll be nothing you ever expected. They had prepared for earthquakes and wildfires and windstorms. Nobody imagined a square mile of mountain, burying an entire neighborhood. That just didn't occur to anybody. And it was in a jurisdiction where the only full-time emergency response worker was the fire chief. Everything else was a volunteer fire department. Go. That was
That's right.
That was what they had. So that was the big lesson there, that nobody had a plan for that. And I'm willing to bet that if something terrible was to happen to our community, it would be something nobody ever expected. And we can we can sit around and imagine, but it's just, we're going to have to make it up as we go along.
The drills we do, we try to rotate the different flavors of drills. We've done several earthquakes. The last one we did was a lahar that took out infrastructure, but the ash was floating over Seattle. So every one of these drills makes us go in and do some research, because at least now, if we actually do have ash fall, we've got something under our belts so we thought about it. So terrorism, we've done one of those. It's just unbelievable the variety of things that can go wrong. But the hubs have really adopted the motto: be flexible, be adaptable, be inventive about what you're trying to get done. It's amazing.
But the fundamental skills and issues to resolve are going to be the same. Yes. Making sure everybody's safe, maybe surviving, for 3 or 4 or 5 days, supporting each other, supporting yourself or supporting each other, and not expecting a lot from government right away. You probably have a separate presentation on what people can expect of the city immediately following a big earthquake, and the whole windshield survey thing, which may be a surprise to a lot of people. And these plans are constantly changing. I was really interesting, because in the early 90s, when I took my NERT training in San Francisco, and then 20 years later taking CERT training, just how much the thinking had changed in what's the best way to respond to these things.
Yeah. In just the 4 years we've been doing this, I can see thinking change. How much do you radio into the city? Oh no, don't radio so much in, because we're overwhelmed. Christchurch taught them that they can't take too much information. It just stops you dead rather than not having visibility. So it's always a refinement of what did you learn last time you tested, and what new direction you got to move. This is I'm seeing now. I'm ready to go out and do another drill. I'm all excited to get this going, because I really enjoy talking to people like you who want to plug in. You have you've got the skills. You've got a responsibility to your condo group that you're trying to get up and organized. You know how to plug into the larger community, and you're exercising those skills. And that is the message of the day: is if you went to CERT training or you went to SNAP training and you're sort of not putting those skills out there for people to grow from, we want people to be like you and go out and do that. Yeah. So are you go ahead first.
Well, I was just you continue. Oh, you and I are already on a committee to plan some of these drills, and we may end up coming with some mini exercises just lasting an hour or two, just to get people used to different places that they can go. The thing to emphasize is that we don't have hubs in all parts of the city. We don't have CERTs in all part of the city. So it's important to reach out to try and find out where there is a community organization. And that knowledge may be critical if there is no hub in your neighborhood. Just having that knowledge, knowing that you really are on your own, will help you make your own plans and in your own response.
Yep. So, and that's an excellent segue to we've shown everybody, or you've heard the website that you can go to. That's the City of Seattle, so you can learn how to sign up for information and get visibility about their training classes. If you want more information about the hubs that we've been talking about, we had done that somewhat in another show, but we've covered a lot of good information. Their basic website is at seattlehubs.org. And if you go to that, down at the bottom, you'll see a couple of things. There's the map of the current hubs, and we're getting ready to do an update to that map and add some more. there's also a link now to the video. We took a video during the last drill so that people can actually visualize what we're talking about when we say, you know, all these people come together and what is it they do. And then the rest of that webpage is devoted to, for the areas like Queen Anne, Magnolia, West Seattle, Wallingford, that do have hubs. Then they have links so that you can contact either your local community. Oh, there we go. Thank you, Chet. And if you don't see one of those, send us, you know, there's a way to send us an email, and we'll talk to you about, maybe there's one coming up and they're just not on the map yet, or we'll talk to you about your interest if you want to set one up. And then the other thing I wanted to say is Dave has been gracious enough to he's going to give you his email contact, because sometimes people just go, that guy I just heard, he had some great ideas and I want to do that in my area and I want to talk to him. So Dave, you want to give me your contact information, please?
Yeah, probably the easiest thing is I've got a website, davidwilma.com. I'm a freelance writer, so that features my writing skills. But the best thing is probably the easiest thing is the email address, davidwilma@comcast.net. So you can just do a web search on me and you're going to come up with some way to get in touch with me. I've gotten some really remarkable, unexpected contacts from people just because of that. So,
yep. And that is the truism. When you reach out and talk to someone about something, you are amazed by what doors open, what paths are shown to you, and the connections in the city are what make all these programs really work. They're not so much government driven. They are grassroots citizens. Let's look out for ourselves.
Yeah, and I guess the big takeaway from any of these discussions for someone who, you know, maybe just tunes in, is the best thing that anybody can do is to think about it ahead of time. If you can get some training, if you can start doing, you know, laying in food and the kinds of things that you would need to actually become a community volunteer, that's great. But the most important thing is to think ahead of time. What would I do? How would I handle it? Okay, let's say I'm at work and the kids are at school. What are we going to do? I think the plan now is that there's some kind of a thing. The kids will shelter in place at the school until parents pick them up. They don't turn them loose. That's the way we used to do it in San Francisco, is we had to go pick up the kids. If I'm out of town, what am I going to do? If one of us is out of town, what am I going to do? Just like families should drill about a fire. How do we get out of the house? Where are we going to meet? Families should do that. We're going to meet under the tree so we know that everybody's out of the house. Think about what you would do in the event of a citywide power failure, a snowstorm that left 18 inches on the ground, something like that. And that, thinking about it, talking about it to your family, your neighbors, and just have that discussion. And that, boy, that gets you halfway there.
That totally gets you halfway there, especially if you're thinking about the solutions, not, oh my God, just go, yep, it could happen, and what would I do? And we're all pretty creative, so that's very good advice. Anything else you want to add? Because I'm going to need to move on to cover our calendar of events. This was an excellent interview. You gave us a lot of really good information. Anything else?
I don't have that. You know, we could talk about this for hours and not cover everything. So just hope people reach out for the information.
Great. All right. Thank you so much, Dave.
Okay.
So we'll go ahead and close the program today. The last thing I want to remind you is I know you probably know about the Seattle Neighborhood Crier.org website. If you're listening to this, sometimes people get to this on the YouTube channel, but that Seattle Neighborhood Crier.org website has what we call the show notes. And so if you go to the show notes, you'll be able to get to the calendar, and the calendar is always current, so we don't mention what events are coming up next week because you may be watching this a year from now, but the calendar will always take you to what current events are going on, and it's also got a repository of all the podcasts and the link to the videos that we've done so far. So thank you, everybody, for joining in. I hope you found this really useful. I always find this topic so important to discuss, and I really appreciate having Dave with us, who's been such a good guest. So thank you, everybody.